Let's kick things off with a look at the rural property market, and it's a very good morning to GM of Rural Property Brokers, Mr. Conrad Wilkshire. Conrad, good morning.
Morning, Hamish. Morning, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Great to have you with us. Are you down in the deep south, are you, sir?
Yeah, been down here this week. I'll tell you what, the Southland farming situation's in good heart. Quite different to the rest of the country. It hasn't had the weather, so it's been pretty dry underfoot. So they've got a very excellent spring. Good calving, good lambing, and the farms are looking brilliant actually. And the market down here is quite different to the national picture. It's about 200 million up year on year, and the sales are going very, very well. There's always been value down south, I suppose, but no more so than this last 12 months.
Interesting, isn't it? There's a bit of a spin-off from that dry period that they did have over sort of summer and into the autumn. So, that had a bit of a positive effect longer term. Okay, so let's have a look at across the country, August sales versus the last 12 months. What can you tell us there, Conrad?
Yeah, well, look, interesting. August is a very early month for rural real estate because it really starts to get underway. October, November is when a lot of these sales really start to kick through into Christmas. But certainly 47 sales for the month of August. This is over 20 hectares for about 134 million, which is backed by both number and dollars. I mean, last year it was about 61 sales, so it's back appreciably on the last 12 months. But there was a bit of a COVID effect last August. But if you stand back from it, look at the market overall, it's operating about 4.5 billion, which is actually as good a result in the post-GFC era that we've had. That's across all sales, not just dairy, obviously. It's the entire market, 4.5 billion. And that's about $500 million up on the same time, rolling 12 months, same time last year. So there's no question that the values are holding up well. But the actual number of sales is actually back, which I was quite surprised about given the commodity cycle that we've had. It's actually back about 14% by number, about 220 farm sales less on a rolling 12 months. So, and we picked that trend will continue. We think the market's going to operate at similar levels on value to last year. We don't, I think, cost increases coming in with borrowing costs. A lot of farmers' borrowing costs because they had such low absolute interest rates this time last year. A lot of that's all rolling off, and so borrowing costs could double. And this season, I think that will play on buyers' minds. I think it will we just don't see we had about a 24% lift in dairy prices last year. We just don't see that probably continuing in the same vein just because of the inflation pressures on farm and cost of borrowing and just the reality of everything. So, but overall, you'd have to say the market is on a firm footing compared to any other period in the last 10 years by a country mile. But people are just measuring their costs and what things are at the moment would be my sort of summary of where things are just now.
What about the impact of inflation, rising food prices? I mean, I guess the dropping dollar, I mean, that's falling through the floor. All these things must be having a pretty vast and wide-ranging effect.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it must, although I imagine business like Fonterra taking a lot of forward hedging out, so how much immediate impact it's having, I'm not sure. But that dollar is obviously very good for exports, and obviously we trade our dairy products and a lot of our other products in US dollars. So that, from an exporting point of view, is favourable. But it's not going to make fertiliser and a lot of the imports any cheaper. That's for sure. So
yeah. So
it's interesting though. When you do a little bit of homework, we're sort of on farm. It's double-digit inflation, and you have to go back to the 70s to see double-digit inflation. And that was off the back of oil shocks and energy shocks, which actually we're internationally, that's what we're experiencing today, not to mention all this easing monetary policy, which has been very inflationary too in terms of, inflating spending. So it's going to be really interesting how quickly these rising interest rates moderate inflation, because those inflation pressures are really high, really high.
Yeah.
Do you
and mind you,
Sorry.
Go, Rebecca.
I was just going to say, do you expect that this inflation and the rising food prices would have an effect on actual farm valuations themselves?
That's a really good question. If you look historically, so I looked at the mid-70s to the mid-80s, and even prior when we had inflation over that decade was running at over 18%, and the food index was operating at similar levels, because inflation does seem to translate into higher food costs and rising commodity cycles. So I'm not suggesting we're going to go to sort of double-digit inflation for the next whatever period, but it is definitely it does rising commodity cycle. The commodity cycle does seem to track inflation, and obviously that tracks into farm gate returns, which then gets capitalised into land value over time. And the other double-edged sword again on this one is that inflation hasn't always been the farmer's enemy. A lot of those farmers that invested in the 70s and early 80s, the inflation was eroding the value of the loan at a significant rate in real dollar terms. So that what seemed like a hell of a lifetime mortgage in sort of the mid 70s was looking pretty. It wasn't looking like a very big debt at all. But I think the other thing, Rebecca, is that a lot of the land valuations that you see is influenced significantly by government policy. So if you look at what happened, in the 70s and early 80s, you had supplementary prices, you had livestock incentive loans, you had land development encouragement loans. There was a lot of government support, and that was definitely being capitalised into valuations. But then you had the 84 Longy government come in and the Rogernomics, and so that rolled back all that support overnight, and those valuations crashed by 87. So at the moment, I think the biggest inflationary impact on land values in New Zealand is the ETS and the speculation on carbon and what we're seeing there. And that is, you have to go back 40 years to that period I've just talked about to see a similar level of market distortion. It is actually out of the box a bit in terms of what we've seen in terms of revaluations of farms, extensive farms particularly.
Yes.
Trends ahead then for the coming months, Conrad? You suspect things might be value staying up, but in terms of numbers, the turnover might not quite be there?
Well, yeah, I think buyers are going to be pretty discerning around compliance, and so we're working really hard with the vendors to anticipate that. And while we say that every season, I think some of the impact on some of the regulation is becoming a lot more apparent to the market. So, if you want to graze dairy heifers, and you haven't done that previously, that's not exactly a fait accompli. There are some requirements that need to be met, and in many instances, a consent might be required. So, just working with our vendors to make sure we're anticipating the questions, because quality assets that have their compliance understood and there's good transparency around the information, I think they should sell and sell well. And we've talked about this before, Hamish. If there is a lot of questions out there, the market tends to discount against that, and so we're trying to avoid that at all costs. Yeah,
we had a good conversation about that a few weeks back, didn't we? You get all your consents in order. I mean, your effluent storage, your bore locations, know everything about your land use, evidence of, etc., etc. So that is a great way to. It will add value, and it will speed up the process.
Yep.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yep. Okay, well, we know you've been down there in Invercargill. I just got one more question for you, Conrad, before you go. And I know you've got a plane to board, or have you got your boarding call?
No, I haven't quite got it yet. It's not far away.
Yeah, I just want to, because I know that you enjoy your footy.
How did I know this was coming up?
Yeah, well, Rebecca, it's just part of the deal. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if we put it in your contract, but it's going to always be part of it.
It should have been.
End of, Conrad, based on what you saw at Eden Park last Saturday night, I just want to know, are you paying your deposit down for your trip to France next year, or are you waiting for the 2027 World Cup?
No, we're going. You might be aware of a group of guys from Messi who go under the heading of the provincial club, and there's about 25 of us. And,
my goodness, France!
Massive deposit. Yeah. We are going to be there with bells on, and we have high conviction on the ABs. No worries about that.
There you go, the provincial club. I've got a bottle of wine from the provincial club. I feel very honoured, actually, at some point along the way. So, hey, you guys, what a magnificent. I don't think you worry. Look, I know you'll want the All Blacks to win, but I don't think you'll worry too much about it. Conrad, we'll let you get on that flight. Thank you very much. That is Property Brokers GM Rural there. Conrad Wilkshire coming to us today from Invercargill. Rebecca.